Masechet Yevamot Daf Ayin He. We have two topics today. The second topic, which begins in the middle of Amud Aleph, is going to be defining what does Pesua Daka Uchrut Shofcha mean, and we'll go into minute and all the gory detail in defining those terms. But first, we're going to be continuing our discussion about eating and then touching terumah. At what stage of purity is one allowed to eat terumah? As we saw, there are three stages of purity. First, one goes to the mikveh during the day, and then becomes a tevul yom. And then when it gets dark, second level, that's what you need for to eat terumah, and that's called mechusar kippurim, assuming it's someone that needs to bring korban on the 8th day. And once he brings korban on the 8th day, then he's fully tahor for all purposes. All right, so terumah is the second level. You have to go to mikveh during the day and then get dark. The thing is that there are three different pisukim that we were discussing that all talk about terumah and the stage at which terumah can be eaten. So the opening question is, why do we need all three pisukim? Let me show you the three pisukim first, and then we'll see it in the Gemara. The first one is in Vayikra 22 regarding tameh people eating holy foods, and it says ish mizaron vehu sarua or zav. Right now we're understanding this to mean someone who saw only 2 emissions of zav and therefore has to wait 7 days, but does not have to bring a korban, or sarua who is not for sure. Lo yochal ad asher yitar. So here the key word is until he gets pure, but this is kind of ambiguous. What does it mean until he gets pure? Mikveh, I guess, but what else? All right, so that's pasuk 4. Later on in the same perek, says 7, Uba hashemesh vetaher, and it gets dark, and then he becomes tahor. Oh, so this is the second pasuk. And then in chapter 12, Yoledet, the woman who recently gave birth, says also in pasuk 4 that she has demet tahora. She has 33 days after the 7 days after she has a boy. Those 33 days, anytime she sees blood during those days, she's still tahor to her husband, but nevertheless, in terms of consecrated things, she is still tameh. So b'chol kodesh lo tigav el mikdash lo tavo, she cannot touch. We're going to get to touching soon. Lo tavo ad melot yemet tahora, until she completes the days of her purity. So here it depends on counting days. So this is a third pasuk that is referring to terumah, among other things. And here's the question: why do we need all three pisukim? So we begin. Utlata kera'eh b'terumah lamali. Why do we need three pisukim to tell us about the purification of a person so that he can eat terumah? Sirichi, I need all three. Di'me ad asher yitar. If I only had 22 for the context of zav and sarua there, and it says until he becomes pure, I wouldn't know what is required for him to become pure. I only know that he's prohibited from terumah until he gets pure. What does that mean? Oh, now I know. It has to be he went to the mikveh. That's implied in asher yitad. But also he has to wait till it gets dark. Good. So wait till it gets dark. Not Tvul Yom is not good enough. He has to be nighttime. And if I only had this, I would say that's only true in a case where a person does not have to bring a korban. If it's a zav that only saw 2 times, then that's sufficient for him to wait at night. Wait till nighttime, because that's how we understood so far that Perek is talking about a zav only 2 times. Aval debar kapara. But what if it was a zav that saw 3 times and who has to bring a korban the next day? I might think that he cannot eat terumah until he finishes his full process and brings the korbanot. Ema demaite kapara katab rachamana ad melot. That's why regarding the Yoledet, it says until she completes the days. That's it. You'd only have to complete the days. You don't have to wait till the next day. and bringing the korban. Okay, v'katav lachamana ad melot. So now we say, why not only bring the third pasuk? Hava amina afilu b'lo tevila, because then I might think, oh, until you finish counting the days, even before you go to the mikveh, I completed the days. That's all I need. So that's why I have to say, katav rachamana ad asher yitar. That's why I need the first pasuk. No, you have to do the purification process, which is at least mikveh. Not only mikveh, second pasuk says also wait till nighttime. Well, what about sacrifice? No, Yoledet says just complete the days. Although Yoledet herself does have to bring a sacrifice, but that pasuk says until the days are completed. So therefore, we need the combination of all three pasukim to teach me that is someone who is Tameh can eat teruma once he goes to the mikveh and waits till nighttime, does not have to bring the sacrifices. All right, that's all according to the assumption that chapter 22 is talking about Zav only saw 2 times. But there's another opinion. Those who argue with the school of Ishmael, they say that Vayikra 22 is talking about a full zav who saw 3 times, or Mesorah who's fully a Mesorah, they have to bring a korban also. So according to them, we have a different question. V'hai ad asher yitar ad demaite kapara. They interpret that the pasuk ad asher yitar to mean that he has to bring the korbanot. So according to them, why do I need 2 different pesukim in order to teach me this? One, let's look at the pesukim, is in 22, and one is regarding the yoledet. It says for her that she has to bring birds, a sacrifice, v'chiped aleh kohen v'tahera. Only once she is atoned through korbanot, then she becomes pure. So you see, we have 2 different pesukim that are teaching us that a person needs to fully bring their korbanot in order to eat kodesh, right? That's the rule. In order to eat teruma, you just have to wait till nighttime. You don't have to bring the korbanot. But in order to eat sacrificial meat, then you have to be fully tahor after you bring the korbanot of Kippurim. Why do I need 2 pesukim? This is according to the one who says that there are 2 pesukim for it. Why do I need both? So Sirichi, we say we need them both. If only the pasuk regarding the woman who just gave birth, mishum demiruba tum'ata, she is tameh for a very long time, 40 days for a boy, 80 days for a girl. So I might say only regarding her, she has to bring, she's very tameh, so over a long time, therefore she has to bring korbanot before she can have kodesh. Aval bezav emalaba, maybe for a zav who's only for tameh for 7 days, maybe not so tameh. So maybe I would think that a zav does not need to bring a korban in order to eat kodesh. So that's why it says zav. V'katav rachamana bezav, and if I only had zav, if it only told me regarding zav, I would say that a zav needs to bring a korban before he can eat kodesh, because every person who sees an emission that is a zav type emission will become tameh. There are no exceptions. Lo hutad mikelalo. There are no exceptions that are permitted from the rule. But regarding yoledet, there is an exception. What is that? That a yoledet, she is, let's say for a boy, she is tameh for 7 days. However, for the next 33 days, even though she sees blood, she's still permitted to her husband. So you see that that's an exceptional type of thing. Usually someone who bleeds, she becomes tameh. But this one is an exception. She sees the same thing, but she is permitted to her husband. It's demeh tahora. And so since she has that exception, which the zav doesn't have, I might think that the zav is more stringent, and therefore only the zav has to bring a korban before he can eat a korban, and not so for yoledet. That's why siricha, and we need to say it in regarding both cases. Okay, good. And so now we're going to be moving to the prohibition against touching teruma. Bamayim yuva v'tameh ad ha'arev. This is another pasuk in Vayikra 11, which we can look at, which says, if a sheretz, a reptile that is dead, falls on some vessel, and it doesn't matter if the vessel is made out of wood or cloth or leather or sack, anything that it falls on, well, kol kasher yasem melacha behem, b'mayim yuba v'tameh ad ha'aref v'taher. So you have to put it in water, and then it will be tameh. You have to put it in the mikveh. It will be tameh until the nighttime, and then it will become pure. A simple reading is that it's tameh until the nighttime, and then it becomes pure. The Gemara is going to notice that it doesn't say v'yitar, but rather v'taher, reading that as if it was also taher, and therefore a kind of contradiction. It was tameh until evening. It was also tahor until evening. So how could it be both tameh and tahor at the same time? The Gemara will say it's for different purposes. All right, so let's go back to the Gemara and see how it interprets it. So, Lamali, why do I need this whole pasuk in the first place? Amar bizera lingi'ah. This is talking about even touching teruma. If such a vessel that became tameh through a sheretz, and then it touched teruma, then that teruma it becomes itself impure, and that is a problem. And so too, not only a vessel, but also a person, that even though they went to the mikveh during the day, they're a tivul yom, if they eat teruma, if they touch teruma, that also is a problem and makes that teruma tameh, even though he went to the mikveh already. Okay, now how do we know this? That is talking about this time period. De Tanya. Well, we know it's at this time period after, because it says until he went to the mikveh until nightfall. But how do we know it's talking about teruma? As follows: De Tanya baraita says v'tameh. Yachol lakol. Does that mean it's tameh for everything? Anything that this vessel touches will become tameh? Talmud Omar v'taher. But the last word says v'taher. It had been pure. So v'taher yachol lakol. So let's say, I guess everything it touches, since you dipped in the mikveh already, maybe anything it touches is tahor. No, Talmud Omar tameh. It says v'tameh. Hakesad. How can it be? Kan le'ma'aser, kan le'truma. So when it says it will make something tahor, it had been tahor, then even if it touches it, it remains tahor. That's talking about ma'aser sheni. But when it says v'tameh, that's talking about if it touches teruma becomes tameh. So these different food items have different susceptibilities to tum'ah. During that time, in between time period of a tivul yom, whether it be a vessel or a person that went to the mikveh and is waiting nighttime, if that person or vessel touches maaser sheni, it's okay, it remains tahor. If it touches teruma, it makes the teruma tameh. Okay, now question on that. How do you know it's in that order? Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's teruma that remains tahor and maaser sheni that becomes tameh. No, that can't be. Mistabera ki hechi de chamira achila de teruma ma'achila de maaser hachinameh chamira negi'ah de teruma negi'ah de maaser. It just makes sense that just as eating teruma is more stringent, you cannot eat teruma until it gets dark. We just proved that. And so, just like teruma is more stringent regarding eating than eating maaser, which maaser can be eaten by a tivul yom, so too regarding touching, it makes the most sense that touching teruma would be more stringent than touching maaser sheni. Okay, that does make perfect sense. The other way around, it would lead to a kind of strange thing that you'd say you're allowed to eat maaser sheni as a tivul yom, but you can't touch it. Well, then how do you do that? Maybe you have to if you wrap it in a cloth and swallow it whole, so you don't touch it, but you do eat it, right? It's not even clear how you would even do that. But anyway, it doesn't make sense, and so we can conclude that it's maaser sheni that you can touch and eat as a tivul yom, but teruma cannot touch or eat as a tivul yom. That's one source. Or another source for the law about touching. We know you cannot touch teruma as a tivul yom from this pasuk. Michol kodesh lo tigar. Regarding a yoledet, it says that she also cannot touch teruma. We need the full pasuk in order to understand this. Here. Shloshim yom, u'shloshim yom teshe b'dmei tahora. during that time period of 33 days, bechol kodesh lo tiga. There you go. She can't touch kodesh. And vela mikdash lo tavo ad melot yemei tara. She also not allowed to come to the Bet HaMikdash. People think, why can't she come to Bet HaMikdash? In the olden days, a lot of women, after they gave birth, they were so thankful they would do different fertility rites in pagan temples. So the Torah wanted to exclude any possibility of this kind of idolatry. So you know what? They said, if you just gave birth, you're not even allowed to come to the Bet HaMikdash at all. So that might be one of the reasons behind this law. In any case, she cannot come to the Bet HaMikdash. She is teme'ah for that. She can be with her husband, but cannot come to the Bet HaMikdash. So now let's understand this. This is, the Baraita says, Bechol kodot tiga azhara la'ochel, o eno ela la'nogea. Is this warning that yoledet during those days, 40 days or 80 days, that she cannot eat terumah, or is it talking about touching terumah? Now, literally, it says touching. So, but why would we even think that's eating? Talmud Omar bechol kodesh lo tiga ve'ela mikdash lo tavo. Makish kodesh lo mikdash. Ma mikdash davar sheyesh bo netilat neshama. Af kodesh davar sheyesh lo netilat neshama. Because the pasuk juxtaposes this touching kodesh with coming to the Bet HaMikdash. Well, if someone enters the Bet HaMikdash in this state, she will receive karet. That's what it means, taking her life into her own hands. So too, since it's juxtaposed, this kodesh, whatever she's doing with it, must be something that would be chayav karet. Now that would only be true for eating. Therefore, even though it says touch means like don't even come close to it to eat it. Okay, but just by touching, there's no punishment of karet for only touching terumah, so therefore it has to mean eating. Okay, then why not say eating? And the reason why it says eating with using a verb language of touching is to teach that touching is also prohibited, like eating is prohibited. Although eating gets karet, touching does not get karet, but touching terumah is also prohibited and will make the terumah impure. You're not allowed to make a terumah impure on purpose. So there you go. Now we learned not only the laws of eating, but also of touching terumah, that both are permitted for after it gets dark, but both are prohibited as a tivul yom. And now we get to the next section of the Mishnah. The Mishnah taught that pesua daka uchrut shofcha, someone who has injury to his privates, can eat terumah if he's a kohen. It doesn't make him pasul from eating terumah. His servants also can eat. Thing is, he can't get married in that state. He's not allowed to get married. Lo yavo pesua daka uchrut shofcha b'kal Hashem. However, what if he was already married before the injury? So kohen married a woman, perfectly good, and she's eating terumah because she's married to a kohen. And then during the marriage, he gets an injury. So now, from that point on, they are not allowed to be together to have bi'ah. But let's say they don't. Before they have bi'ah, can she eat? The Mishnah says yes. She can continue to eat terumah because they were legally married and they didn't have bi'ah yet. That would make her pesula. All right, so that's the case we're talking about. We ask, Man tana mishtamedet lebi'a pesula deoraita achla. Who is the Tana who thinks that a woman who is awaiting a bi'ah which is prohibited on the Doraita level can nevertheless eat terumah? Right? You see this woman, how long are they going to stay celibate? She is awaiting bi'ah with someone she is prohibited to because now he got this injury, and yet she can eat. Who says this opinion? We're going to compare it now to a previous Mishnah we saw a while ago that said if an almana, for example, is mikudeshet to a kohen gadol. So this is a prohibited relation. Even though it's prohibited, if you do it, it's valid. So he gave her the ring, and now she is awaiting to be with a prohibited kohen. Can she eat in the meantime? Can she have terumah? Because there was no bi'ah yet. We saw this was a machloket. Tanakama, Rabbi Meir said, no good. On the Rabbanan level, she's awaiting bi'ah with someone pasul, so she's expecting something that's a sin. Therefore, even from now, she cannot have teruma. But the other opinion said it's permitted. Amar Rabbi Elazar b'machloket shenuya v'Rabbi Elazar v'Rabbi Shimon he. This was a topic of a machloket, and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon over there said that a woman who is awaiting nisuin with a kohen she is prohibited to can eat teruma during that time period. So too here, this woman who was married and her husband became a pesua daka, but they didn't have biyah yet, even though she's awaiting prohibited relation. Right now, she's okay. Okay, so this Mishnah must follow only Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, not Rabbi Meir. But then Rabbi Yochanan comes and saves the day because we don't want to limit the Mishnah to only one side. And he says, Rabbi Yochanan, Amar afilu tema Rabbi Meir, shanehacha shekevat achala. I can even explain that our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, and this case is different because she was already married in a permitted way and she was already eating teruma. So now she can continue eating teruma even though she is awaiting the next bi'ah will be prohibited. Because you have the momentum of the force of her already having eaten. That's different from the case back there where she was a Bat Yisrael. She never ate teruma. She just got engaged. But she's awaiting a prohibited bi'ah. So there, the force to start from scratch, you need more force to move than if you already have momentum. And so because she was not already eating, this awaiting bi'ah pesula is not going to permit her to eat teruma. So we can even reconcile it with Rabbi Meir. Now, Rabbi Elazar is the one that said it's machloket. Rabbi Yochanan said it's not a machloket. So according to Rabbi Elazar, what will you say about this claim of Rabbi Yochanan that it's different because she was already eating in this case? Rabbi Elazar would say shekevar achla lo amrinan. I don't think that principle is a true principle, that it makes a difference that you were already eating, so you can continue with the momentum of the previous permission. Because if you agree with that principle, then Bat Yisrael sheni said the Kohen umet bala tochal shekevar achla. Then you would have to say that if you had a Bat Yisrael who married a Kohen and now she's eating teruma, a regular case, permitted relation, and then her husband died, well, she was already eating, so let her continue eating even after her husband died, even if there's no children, right? According to your principle, she was already eating. The momentum continues. So you see that we don't say that principle there, so I don't hold that principle anywhere, and Rabbi Meir cannot be the author of this Mishnah. Okay, what would Rabbi Yochanan say to that? Rabbi Yochanan, hatam paka kinyaneh, hacha lo paka kinyaneh. Rabbi Yochanan says completely different. In that case, where the husband dies, then the acquisition is gone, meaning there is no more marriage. You end marriage through get or mitah. And in this case, he died, so therefore she is not acquired. She is not under the household of a Kohen anymore. So of course she cannot eat. It's completely different. Whereas here, in the case where they were married, he becomes a pesua daka, but they're still married. And so therefore the momentum of having been able to eat teruma beforehand, that in this case it does continue. They are married, even though the next bi'ah will make her pesula, but for now it's still okay, even according to Rabbi Meir. We now come to the last section of the Mishnah, which, trigger warning, is going to be a little bit gory. We are describing, what does this mean? Lo yavo, it's worth looking at the Pesukim in context because it's going to come up. Pasuk says, Lo yavo pesua daka uchrutchovcha bikal Hashem. So let's look at what these words mean literally. Pesua means wounded. Daka means crushed. It doesn't actually say what part is crushed, but we're going to understand this as the testicles. The Gemara will refer to betzim. We'll use that term as well. Uchrut means severed. Shofcha literally just means a spiller, something that pours, a pourer. Harambam in Moreh Nevuchim, Part 3, Chapter 8, says, why is Hebrew called Lashon HaKodesh? It says, because there are no words for male, female, reproductive organs, but rather even the Torah uses euphemisms for everything. So this is one example that he actually brings, which is that the male member is called a spiller, because it spills while someone urinates. That's it. Okay, so this Gemara will talk about what exactly all these terms refer to. This person cannot get married. In the context, we also say that lo yavo mamzer. Mamzer cannot marry until 10th generation. Other people also, or other generations, Amoni, Moavi, and so on. Okay, so that's the context, and now we can go back and say, Ezehu Petsua Daka. What does that mean? Tenora Banan. Ezehu Petsua Daka, Kol Shnifsu Besim Shelo, Afilu Achat Mehen. Petsua Daka, crushed means anyone who has a wound to his betsim, even if only one betza. The Mishnah said that as well. Afilu Nikebu, Afilu Nimoku, Afilu Chasiru. And not only crushed, also punctured, decayed, deficient, became smaller for whatever reason. All these are included, and that person cannot marry into the regular Jewish community. Amar Rabbi Ishmael beno shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. Shamati mipi chachamim bekerim beyavneh. Kol she'en lo ela basa echat, en lo ela seris chama vekasher. This point is actually subject to machloket, because he heard from the sages in Yavneh, early sages, that someone who has one betzah is okay. He's called seris chama. Seris chama generally means someone who is not injured by accident or by mankind, but rather someone who's born, someone who's physically, anatomically intact, but cannot have children for because of some other reason or condition, and that person can marry. And so someone who has only one betzah is the same as that person. Gemara asks, clarifies, is it really the same as someone who is only by natural causes unable to bear children? And it's not the same. He has only one betzah. He's not anatomically is deficient. Rather, it just means that the law regarding him is the same as a seris hama, and therefore is permitted to marry. Good. V'nikav lo molid. Now, this whole time, see, we're assuming that all of these types of injuries are problematic because the man cannot reproduce when he has any of these. So that's kind of the definition of what injury would be sufficient of an injury. So now, if his betzim are punctured, is that really true that the person cannot have a child? We have an actual story of a person. He was climbing up a tree, and silva besim, and a thorn punctured him in his betzim. And nevertheless, some pus came out of him, and he was able to have a child. So there you go. Even someone who is punctured can still have a child. So that goes against the definition we said earlier in the Baraita. But actually, that story is not a question. Hashalach Shemuel lekameh derav. Shemuel, who is also known as a doctor, sent this case to Rav, and he said, go and check if his children are really his, where they came from. In other words, Rav said, no, the Baraita is right, and someone with a puncture cannot actually bear children. If this couple has children, it must be because she committed adultery. Go and investigate. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shemuel, Pesua daka bidei shamayim kasher. Someone who was born with crushed betzim, some problem. If they're born that way, that's okay. It's only a problem if there was a accident that happened after they were born. Amar Rava, hainu de karinan pesua velo karinan vevekolanen hapatsua. And what's the proof? Rava says, since it says pesua, which sounds like a verb, he became crushed, and it doesn't say hapatsua, the crushed one, which is more of a noun, which would indicate he was born that way. That's his proof to back up Shemuel. Bematnitatana, or another proof for a similar idea. Ne'emar lo yavo pesua, v'ne'emar lo yavo mamzer. Malalan bidei adam, afkan bidei adam. These two pesukim are back to back. The person with crushed privates and someone who's a mamzer. How do you get a mamzer? That's because of human hands, because two people got together in a prohibited relationship and they had a child. So just like that is because of human action, so too the word pesua is only because of human action, whether on purpose or by mistake, doesn't matter, but that excludes someone who's born with a deformity. That person is permitted to marry. Amar Rava, pesua bechulan, dach bechulan, karut bechulan. Rava says, although in the pasuk it says different verbs, adjectives, they all three, pesua, meaning wounded, or daka, crushed, or severed, all of these three actions apply to every part of the anatomy. Don't think that crushed is only for betzim and severed is only for the gid, the member itself, but rather all three apply to all. Actually, there's three parts of the anatomy. As we're going to see, pasua bechulan ben shenifsa hagid, ben nifshu besim, ben shenifseu chote besim. Regarding wounding, that applies to the gid, the member itself, or the betzim, or the vessels and arteries that connect everything together. If any of those are wounded, no good. Dach bechulan, crushed, that applies also. Ben shenidach hagid, ben shenidechu besim, ben shenidechu chote besim, and also karut, severed, that applies to all three parts. Bechulan, ben shenichirat hagid, ben shenichiretu besim, ben shenichiretu chote besim. Good. Amar lehahu merabanan lerava. Mimai dahai pesua daka beoto makom. Now, for a more fundamental question, because Hebrew uses euphemisms, so it's not even clear. How do we even know that this pasuk is talking about that place, right? Meaning one's reproductive organs. Maybe it's talking about one's head, one's actual head. So you have had a head injury, and his head is not severed, but crushed or something, some wounded. Maybe that person cannot marry. And so his answer is no. Since it doesn't say anything about generations, right, for other ones, for Ammoni, Moavi, right, it says, here's how many generations you cannot marry that person. For Pesua Daka, it doesn't say any generations. So we can infer that because this injury is to the reproductive organs, this is a person who cannot have a child, and therefore it must be talking about the reproductive organs and not any other limb of one's body and not one's head. Okay, v'dilma hai delamana bodorot deihu hu da'asur bereh ubar bereh kasher. Wait, maybe that's not a good proof. Maybe the reason why it didn't say after 3 generations is permitted, and maybe it's because only he is prohibited. Let's say, going back to someone who has a head injury, only that person cannot marry, but their children can marry. So that's why it didn't say anything, because there's no prohibition that lasts more generations. You don't have to say anything if it doesn't continue for generations. So that's not a proof. Rather, dumya de chirut shofcha. Rather, pesua daka, we're comparing to chirut shofcha. Ma kirut shofcha beoto makom, just like a severed member is talking about reproductive organs. Avhai nameh beoto makom, so too crushed is talking about a reproductive organ. Uchirut shofcha gufeh mimai de beoto makom huf. All right, so now you're going to prove pesua daka from kirut shofcha, but kirut shofcha itself, how do you know it's talking about the male member? Maybe it's talking about something else that's severed. Ema misifte, maybe if one's lips are cut off, then that person cannot marry. No, shofcha ketib b'makom sheshofech. No, it has to be something that pours, whereas lips, although if you spit, that spit, shoots out, spits out, and doesn't pour, and therefore cannot be talking about one's mouth, unless someone is drooling. One time I had a student who was, she asked me some dating advice. She said she went out with a guy who was drooling. I said, that's disgusting. What's wrong with this guy? I don't know. Why would you want to marry someone who's drooling? She says, no, not drooling, rather juuling, Juul. Okay, that was a different problem altogether. She ended up breaking up with him either way, so it didn't matter. Okay, so generally people don't drool, but rather spit, and therefore you wouldn't call the mouth a spiller. So therefore, it can't be that. So ve'ema mechotamo, maybe it's talking about a nose because a nose runs, and therefore a nose could be called a spiller. Miketi bishfoch kirut shofcha ketiv. No, it doesn't say which spills, which sounds like it spills all the time, but rather something that only spills when cut. מי שעל ידי כריתה שופך, שלא על ידי כריתה אינו שופך, אלא מקלח, לפוקח היי דאידי ואידי שופך הוא. So therefore, it has to be some part of the anatomy that only spills when it's severed, but because it's severed. But if it's not severed, then it does not spill, but rather streams or ejects. And so that would be talking about the male member, and it would not be talking about a nose where the nose runs no matter whether the nose is fully intact or it's severed, the nose will still run. So therefore, it's not talking about a nose, and so that's all that is one way that we know. Or another way, במתניתת תנא נאמר לא יבוא פסוע דקה ונאמר לא יבוא ממזר, מה ללן באותו מקום, אף כאן באותו מקום. Another way to know that it's talking about reproductive organs and not anything else is through the juxtaposition of this injury with mamzer. How does one become a mamzer? Because the man and woman reproduced through their reproductive organs and created a mamzer. So too, pesua daka is juxtaposed because that also is in that place. And so that's how we resolve that question. Okay, now exactly what types of cuts and severs count as a problem and which don't. Nikav lemata me'atara shekenegdo lemala me'atara. We have to define some terms. When we say here lemata, it's the opposite of what we might usually think. We have to think of a man standing up and his member is down. So that means lemata means away, the part of his member away from his body. Lemala means towards his body. Okay, so if he has something that's severed below the corona, and as let's say it's a straight cut, like vertically, and so the top part of the cut is above the corona, so that the lower part of the corona is there, but not the upper part. Well, what did we do in that case? Bichia said, sounds like it should be good since at least the lower part of the corona is intact. But Rabbi said, the name of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, no, it's no good. A puncture in the corona of any size is going to be a problem, will not be able to be fertile, and therefore cannot marry. All right, back to the Mishnah that says if there remains some portion of the corona, even if it's as small as a hair's breadth, that person can marry, it's okay. What does that mean? There has to be a hair's breadth left. Does that mean around the entire thing or just a majority of its circumference? And he says, no, it's really just the majority, but the majority has to be the upper part of it. And so that would make sense that this one was a problem because the upper part was cut and only the lower part was there. And so it has to be that the majority of the upper part is there. Even if it's a hair's breadth, that's okay. Now, there's two different types of cuts here when comparing it. One like a quill, which would mean some kind of vertical cut that makes the member sharp, thin. Marzev is like a gutter, which means that there's a cut like a kind of U shape if you look at it head on and down the entire shaft of the member. Okay, so two different types of cuts. Kulmus, he says, is permitted. Marzev, the gutter one, is no good. Hay shalet be'avira, v'hay shalet la shalet ba'avira. What's the reason? Because if it's a gutter-like, then air penetrates all around and then interferes with the flow. Whereas if it's a cut like a quill, then the air does not enter and the person can function okay. Rav Chisda says the opposite. Hai gared v'hai la gared. Why? Because if someone is a marzev, so even though he has this gutter cut, but nevertheless most of the outside of the member is still there, so he will feel friction when he is with his wife. Whereas the one who is cut more sharply will not have friction and will not be able to function properly. So Rava says, you know what, I think that Rav Huna was said first here. He makes sense because of the air penetration is an important factor. If you're worried about the friction and the rubbing, it's like a stopper of a barrel. The stopper of a barrel is like a cork or a cone shape. And so even though this is the quill, even though it's thin on top, but at the bottom, meaning towards the person's body, it becomes wider. And so therefore there is sufficient friction from the thicker part of the cone. And therefore that would not be a problem. So therefore he agrees with Rav Huna. Okay, we can understand the analogies. The more analogies here, the better. We don't have pictures for this. If I put pictures, I think YouTube would take down the video for going against this decency policy. So you have to use your imagination. Amar le Ravina le Meremar, Hachi Amar Morzutra Mishme de Rav Papa. We have the following statement in the name of Rav Papa. Hilchata ben kekolmus ben kemarzev keshera. Although we saw two different opinions here, the halacha is both of these types of cuts, the gutter or the quill, are permitted. That person is permitted to marry. But the question that we still have, that Ravina asks Meremar, is where are these types of cuts talking about? Is it below the corona, meaning towards the floor, or lemala, or above, meaning towards the body? Pishita de lamala matara. And so the answer is, obviously, it has to be above towards the body. That's where it's cut. Because if it's at the lower part of away from the body, even if it's entirely severed, it's okay. Because all you need is a hair's breadth past the corona. So if you have that, it's okay. So therefore, these types of cuts we were talking about are towards the body. So this seems like a simple question. Why is Ravina even asking Meremar if it's such a simple question? Really, Ravina only asked this to trick Meremar. It was a trick question, just to kind of make him confused and make him have to really think about all the different cases. You might call this a low blow. Hahu Ovada, Dava be'Mata Machseya. And now a story that happened in the city of Mata Machseya, Shafyeh Mor bar Rav Asher kekolmus ve'achshere, where a person had a certain injury that was problematic, but Mor bar Rav Asher was an expert in cosmetic surgery, and he was able to shape it like a quill, and therefore said it's permitted. Hahu Ovada Dava be'Pumpedita istatem gobta deshchibat zera va'apik bimkom ketanim. Or another case that happened in Pupandita, where a certain person, he had some injury and the seminal duct became blocked. And then instead, the zera came out of his urinary duct. How could that happen? You can read this note here, where somehow goes into the bladder, and then the semen came out with the urine through the bladder. And so this was a problem. Savar Rabbi but Abaye la'achshure. Rabbi says, well, maybe it should be okay, because it still is coming out. The zera is coming out, so maybe it's fine. Amara pape mishum de'atu memula'e amritu mile mulyata. So now he gives him a personal insult. He says, you, Rabbi, because you come from a truncated people. He was a Kohen, descendant of Eli, who was given a curse that his descendants would be short-lived. So because you are a short-lived person, you say words that are short-lived, that don't make sense. Okay, personal blow. But here, the point is, bimkoma mebasher ha'Hashem koma lo mebasher. If you have zera that's in its place and exits in the right way, then it can fertilize the woman and have a child. But if not, if it's going through the wrong duct, then one cannot have a child in that way, and therefore this person would not be good. That's enough fun for one day. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.